Game changer? What's the question today? More specifically, what if? What if the 2024 presidential campaign cycle isn't actually going to be fought on the ground that we today, right now, think it is? What if the question isn't, are we really going to do this? Are we going to maybe elect a convicted felon running explicitly on a platform that ends the American experiment in democracy? But on a more basic level, should we be asking a different question, like, is he all right? Watch as the presumptive Republican presidential nominee celebrates a deadly domestic terrorist attack he helped incite on the United States Capitol, as he openly shows contempt for and toward his own supporters standing in front of him, as he rambles on and on and on and on about sharks, of all things, in rants so bizarre that Unhinged doesn't come close to capturing it.
He just came up. Are the teleprompters not working, sir? Not even a little bit. Great job. And then I don't pay the company that does it, right? And then I end up with a story Trump doesn't pay. I don't pay contractors that do a job. And that's a job. That's a job. This is the worst border in the history of the world. There's never been. No third world country has a border like that. And no third, I'll tell you what, and I hope the military revolts at the voting booth. I went to a boat company in South Carolina. The boat, I said, how is it? He said, it's a problem, sir. They want us to make all electric boats. So I said, let me ask you a question. And he said, nobody ever asked this question. And it must be because of MIT, my relationship to MIT. Very smart. He goes, I say, what would happen if the boat sank from its weight and you're in the boat and you have this tremendously powerful battery and the battery's now underwater and there's a shark that's approximately 10 yards over there? By the way, a lot of shark attacks lately. Do you notice that? A lot of shark. I watched some guys justifying it today. Well, they weren't really that angry. They bit off the young lady's leg because of the fact that they were not hungry, but they misunderstood who she was. These people are crazy. He said there's no problem with sharks. They just didn't really understand a young woman swimming now really got decimated, and other people too. A lot of shark attacks. So I said, so there's a shark 10 yards away from the boat, 10 yards. Or here, do I get electrocuted? Do you feel the breeze? Because I don't want anybody going on me. We need every voter. I don't care about you. I just want your vote. I don't care. But those J6 warriors, they were warriors, but they were really more than anything else. They're victims of what happened.
Two things to deal with before we go any further. One, Fox News didn't air that speech. What do they know? I don't know. And two, we're not going to bleep him this year. Shitty is the word that he said. Called his teleprompter shitty, called the contractors shitty. This is what he sounds like today, though. That was him, unfiltered, in his own words, in front of his supporters, as he seeks the White House for a third time. He is, of course, a convicted felon. His Earth 2 worldview completely devoid of facts, untethered to reality. He offers no vision at all, to say nothing of a positive vision for the people who support him. Now, whenever Trump talks, between the ramblings or rantings about sharks or electric vehicles, or he seemed to be talking about electric boats there, if you could track it, or windmills, which he still talks about a lot, toilet flushing, the endless stream of lies about the border. Of course, he's the person who killed the bipartisan border deal, or the rule of law, or the system of justice. It's not just lies and disinformation. They're lies that sit at the fulcrum of the threat of dangerous violent extremism and a dangerous escalation that people will act on the rhetoric and the things he says. Trump calling his most violent supporters, the people who he summoned to Washington, who stormed the United States Capitol, quote, warriors, amounts to what New York Magazine today calls a mask-off moment. They write this, quote, portraying the insurrectionists as innocent victims is an obvious lie. Portraying them as warriors is more honest, but the candor reveals a confidence that is quite chilling. Trump has inspired the development of a paramilitary wing to his movement. He has goaded their aggressive impulses and rewarded their loyalty. And as Trump made clear yesterday, if anything was clear at all, his entire campaign, his entire movement is in service of just one thing, Trump. Biden campaign sought to turn Trump's own words against him in what is likely one of the shortest ads of all time. It was released a few hours ago. Watch.
Because I don't want anybody going on me. We need every voter. I don't care about you. I just want your vote. I don't care.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
I think that may be the second mask-off moment of the speech. It's a campaign speech that revealed a Donald Trump more dangerous, more erratic than ever before as he sits today for a virtual meeting with a court-appointed probation officer. It's also where we start today. Former Senator, co-host of MSNBC's How to Win 2024 podcast, Claire McCaskill, is with us. Also joining us, senior advisor to the Lincoln Project and author of The Conspiracy to End America, 5 Ways My Old Party is Driving Our Democracy to Autocracy. I think I called it the first must-read of the cycle. It's fantastic. Stuart Stevens here. And with me at the table for the hour, my friend and colleague, NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. He was there yesterday to witness history. Vaughn Hilliard, this opening of our show today, and the questions I've asked was inspired by your much shorter report on Nightly News that I saw that was unbelievable and included this reporting that you did on Trump supporters there. Let me play that as well, and then I'll turn it over to you.
Would you want him to seek retribution against those who have brought these charges against him?
Of course. They should go to jail. I mean, if you're going to make false accusations, if I made false accusations, I'd be thrown in jail in 2 seconds.
He's not going to get angry. He's got too much to fix. He's not a vengeful person.
He's running as a vengeful person. I mean, and you've done an extraordinary body of reporting. It's shaped most of my thinking about where Trumpism is at this moment. But just take me inside what happened yesterday.
They believe, number one, his supporters, these most loyal supporters that are willing to stand out in triple-degree digits for multiple hours under the Las Vegas sun for a noon rally, that Donald Trump is seeking justice, their version of justice, right? You heard the man call for retribution, saying, of course. I mean, we talked for quite a long time, and he said that it started with Barack Obama. Barack Obama should be jailed. Hillary and Bill Clinton should be jailed. Nancy Pelosi should be jailed. Alvin Bragg should be jailed. The list is long, and they believe that would
President
be just.
Obama do?
He was the beginning of this. He began to spy on Donald Trump's 2016 campaign. This is the part of the conspiracy theory that has been created and has only cemented itself in the minds of people over the course of years to build up to this moment that they believe that these individuals should be jailed. And Donald Trump is looking out and speaking knowingly that people are willing to stand there, thousands of them in triple-digit degree heat, for the very reason that they want him back in the White House. And I think that there is one other gentleman that I talked to where I asked him about, retribution, and he told me in response, he said it was election night 2020 when he first realized that the election was stolen. And he told me that I knew something. I was being lied to. I didn't realize my whole life I'd been lied to, and that the news media is all telling us lies. And we've all just been captured. We're programmed. We believe whatever. We've been programmed to believe this our whole lives. They believe, truly, a great number of people, that they have been captured by the news media, by the Democrats, by the right, and Donald Trump is the justice warrior. And that is why they're willing to stand out in triple-degree heat and listen to a speech for more than an hour from Donald J. Trump.
And let's deal with the speech.
The speech itself, the number one thing for me was when he mentioned warriors. It caught my ear because Donald Trump has heralded this message to his supporters that, it was instigated by FBI informants, which of course is not truth, and that these were peaceful protesters. He's repeatedly said that to cast aside the violent images that we all watched unfold on January 6th. But when he referred for the first time there yesterday to the warriors, he's called them patriots in the past, the January 6 defendants who were jailed, many of them pleading guilty, hundreds of them pleading guilty for assaulting police officers and obstructing an official proceeding. When he called them warriors, that's antithetical to peaceful protest. A warrior, the definition of warrior is somebody who is engaged in warfare or conflict. And so by calling them warriors, again, we hit at the word justice in Donald Trump's version of justice, and his supporters. When he calls them warriors, you're giving them a certain level of valor for the actions that were committed that day. And I can tell you there was one January 6th defendant who was released from prison a couple months ago who said hi to us. That was in the crowd there, right? This is a fight for the country that Donald Trump, by giving them that distinction 5 months out, for me, I don't know what ultimately all this leads to here.
Yeah, but go ahead.
No, but warriors is another step outside that even made me perk up.
I mean, but the thing that makes me burst with exasperation, which is all I can muster for Trump these days in that state, we'll deal with his state. I mean, he couldn't seem to get the word military out. He was ranting and raving about the prompter and then seemed to digress more than he was on a script.
Donald Trump is, he acknowledged the teleprompter wasn't working. I mean, that is what happens when it's 100 degrees. Our phones were dying out there actively. That does happen. Technology doesn't work. Donald Trump, though, has been an unscripted self, an unvarnished self, and that is what this campaign was built to allow here in the year of 2024. That is why people come to listen to him, because he is unvarnished. He is not writing the script, right? And more so than ever, even more than 8 years ago, more than 4 years ago, I think this is Donald Trump in his truest form, and perhaps with age. I don't know what Donald Trump's mental state is, but I can tell you, listening for a speech that goes on for more than an hour, Donald Trump is speaking whatever is on his mind, and there have been no repercussions or consequences. You could say a guilty verdict is a consequence and a potential sentence is a consequence, but politically, if for somebody who may or may not believe that he actually won the 2020 election, he doesn't believe that he has suffered the political consequences yet. And that is what is at stake, and that is what is worth giving a speech, continuing to travel this country to galvanize his supporters for.